Hello, I'm the Just Connoisseur, and today I'll be unveiling movies 20 to 11 of the ranking of every movie that I watched in 2020. Let's get into it. Beginning number 20 is Breaking Away, a movie that about four teenagers in a small town in Indiana who just graduated high school and are struggling to find out what to do with their lives. And we're introduced to them, and they're synonymously known to locals as cutters or stoners. And we're just this one character in particular who's fascinated with cycling and particularly Italian cycling, and he's so determined to create this Italian character, and of which annoys his father much to his chagrin, and while at the same time he's used this persona to attract a girl that he is very the girl of his dreams, and while at the same time he's fascinated with competing in this cycling race in in Indianapolis. And so we root for him in that sense, and you not to mention that his other friends are also involved in this race and trying to get him into being really successful. And when he enters this race and goes up against all these big name Italian cyclists of whom he really looked up to, they turn out to all be jerks, and they all sabotage his performance and prevent him from performing very well, of which he was already doing so. And so the really penultimate climax of the story comes from the main cycling race that all four of their friends end up competing with in a almost a peloton race around a track. We see every member of their friend group contributing to the race, and even though they range from being very skilled like Dave to being able to ride a bike, but yet at the end of the day they're able to successfully win the cycling race and win their dignity back, of which they were pre- experienced immense amount of prejudice from the town for how they acted. And I think that really the main theme for this movie is not only breaking away from oneself to fulfill one's potential, but also breaking away from the prejudices of society, and of which will end up fulfilling one's potential again. And in that sense, I really think the themes of this movie resonate with me, and along with the fact that the cycling portion of the movie is very, very cool. And at the end of the day, I think this movie was definitely warranted of the best original screenplay at the 1979 Academy Awards. Number 19 is Moonrise Kingdom, a very underrated movie from Wes Anderson, and it's a coming of age story, and these are some of my favorite kinds of films in which you have two kids, one of whom is at a summer camp and is determined to attract the services of this fellow young girl, and it's so charming in that sense. The whole aesthetic, Wes Anderson just knows how to. He's just so good at making these kind of period pieces and making us feel like we're in this environment, because this is unlike any kind of movie he's made. I mean, usually with the movies he's he's known for making movies that are very wholesome, which this one is, where you have the main character being attempting to overcome an obstacle in their life, and while also it doesn't help that they have a very exceptional intellect, as I can as examples being in Rushmore or the Grand Budapest Hotel, which I'll get to later. And this movie is no different. It takes the same formula, and it goes beyond that. You also have it that the main kid runs away from his summer camp, and you have all these adults tracking him down, particularly shenanigans ensue, and that everything that it's basically Murphy's law, and that everything that can go wrong goes wrong for the adults as they try to find this kid who's run away with this girl, and whom is is very infatuated with her. And it's honestly your typical tragic love story. You feel like they're destined for each other, but it and also at the same time with all the with everything that's going against them, it almost being a man versus nature kind of film, as a hurricane. It stops their ability to move forward in their relationship, and almost as a personification of the hurdles that they have to overcome to make their relationship work. And overall, it's such a clever made film that was not even made for with a lot of money. And but with the little money that they did have, they put it to good use, and it's a beautifully crafted film. One of which is one of my favorite films of Wes Anderson's. Next up is Last Night. Not to be confused with the Strokes song. This movie tells of the last night humanity before an apocalyptic sized event. Now, what I love about this movie is the subtlety, and how they don't even address why the world is ending. It doesn't even matter, like in this movie. Like you don't and so and so you it's there's an intrigue as to what's gonna happen at the end. And you were introduced to all these different characters, all of whom are almost directly related in some way or another. And particularly, I think that the character who stands out to me the most is Sandra Oh's character. And this is before she got really big in Hollywood, and her performance was extraordinary. We were introduced to her as this single woman who's just going to the grocery store, and when we see her car being looted and destroyed, and so we feel bad, we feel sympathy, and everything that had just gone wrong for her, and just seeing the humanity in people, and the loss of humanity in situations like this really makes you think about our own existence, and how would we react in our dying days. Like, there's a what they do in this movie is they look at different perspectives, and how you have range from having people celebrate the best times, during Christmas, even though the movie is not doesn't take place during Christmas. That's just such a great memory for some people. And then on the opposite scale, you have one of the characters who's attempting to check something off his bucket list, and having sex with a bunch of different people of differing orientations, ethnicities, etc. And it's just so quirky, and how it really makes us question our humanity, and what's our purpose, and answers that question eloquently. I think that this is one of the greatest Canadian made films of all time. And Don McKellar does a great job with his direction in this movie. And the final scene, where it just fades to light, and we can't see anything, is and it's ambiguous as to what happens, is so, even though we don't know exactly what happened in this scene, it's so satisfying that they had a fulfilling end to their life. Next is Memento, the second movie by director Christopher Nolan. And this movie is starts off, and we're immediately thrown into this world where this guy Leonard is struggling to find his identity. He suffers from short-term memory loss, and he can only really remember things that for a couple seconds, or of any or garner what is happening based off these Polaroid photos he's taken. And so he sees these pictures, and he's written something on them to try to, almost mementos in a way, of trying to get him to remember. certain events. And by doing this, he's able to uncover the events that led up to what happened. And he soon discovers that things are not as what they seem to be. And in particular, he's met with this friend who he's supposed to meet, but we soon realize that through these series of pictures that he's taken, that he's not supposed to trust this guy, and so he becomes wary of what is true and what is fiction, ultimately causing him to question his own reality, and ultimately kill this guy. It seemed like he was friendly to him, and it's such a cleverly crafted film. I mean, Christopher Nolan, he's very good at making films that relate to the theme of time, and this one's no different. It's, if anything, is the start of it. And we go the movie is not filmed in order. It's filmed out of order, and so you have to put together the pieces, and it really makes you think, and how it is. I mean, also not to mention Leonard is a unreliable narrator because of the fact that he cannot remember everything that happened. We can't really rely on how valid that these events occurred, and so as a result, you have to take it with a grain of salt, and that this movie could just entirely be based in his imagination, and that the whole like questioning of what we see that Christopher Nolan would end up perfecting in Inception really came to light in Memento. I think Memento is just a little bit better than Inception because it has the rawness and the mysteriousness of the fact that we don't really know what's going on, but we're intrigued to know how it unfolds. Overall, I think that this movie did an excellent job with that, and it's definitely a movie that I will remember, unlike Leonard or Guy Pearce in this movie. Number 16 is Cars. Now, Cars, I have a sentimental love for this movie, and the fact that I have some of my earliest memories watching this movie in theaters, and as a result, it's one of having grown up on it, it's easily one of my favorite Pixar movies, even though it's not perfect and that's okay. I respect everyone else's opinion, but to me, this is almost a near flawless movie. I I just love the whole setup around the cars. Even if you don't think about it, then it's a perfectly fine and acceptable premise. I mean, it is kind of cliche in a way because it's based on old 60s movies, and I understand that. I think that what they do a good job in redeeming Lightning McQueen, who starts off as this smug and unlikable character, and through a series of hardships, i.e., getting lost in Radiator Springs, he learns to be more considerate and be more humble. Obviously, being taught by one of the best in Doc Hudson, voiced by Paul Newman. And soon once he regains his ability to go back and race through his new learned experiences at Radiator Springs and really newfound appreciation for the world, he's able to go into this big race and not perform for himself like he'd always been. You know, he was always performing for the for his own brand, but perform for his on representing his newfound haven in Radiator Springs. And in the last scene when the king gets plowed down by Chick Hicks, and it's so heartwarming when he pushes the king to the finish line so he can truly win in his last race. And it just goes to show you how much he's learned over this journey. And for that, I think that, and also, how can I forget the songs in this movie are classic, being Our Town or Life is a Highway. And the animation is not too bad too, especially for mid 2000s movie. They did a good job animating all the cars and all the different and everything. I really like all the puns they made with some of the race car drivers and the race car announcers. And overall, it is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I don't think there's a doubt in my mind. I hope I would say it's gone lower in my list as I get older, but I think that it's still a sentimental favorite of mine that I will cherish for the rest of my life. As we approach halfway through today's list, we get to number 15, and in contrast to Cars, it is Tropic Thunder. Another one of my favorite movies of all time. It's so hard to describe the premise of it because it's so wild in how metaphysical in how it's trying to be. You have these actors who are on set to play in a big Vietnam War-esque film, and at the same time they're actually filming in Vietnam and trying to get as realistic as possible, or even going as far as filming the movie in the jungle. And we're introduced all these characters, and all these characters, all these actors have inherent flaws, and particularly being they all have huge egos. They're all selfish. They're almost pretty much a basic actor in how they act, and they're left to their own devices in the Vietnamese jungle with little to no experience in this kind of environment. And so it's definitely not trying to be politically correct with this movie. And whether it be the infamous line,
everybody knows you never go full retard,
or the fact that Robert Downey Jr. is literally wearing blackface to a lesser extent, but I mean it's played off as a joke, as the fact that he said in the movie that he was
I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
And particularly when they end up getting the trek through the jungle after losing their director, they soon realize that there's more to life than acting in a movie, and they actually learn invaluable skills. And particularly, I think one scene that stands out to me as one of the funniest in the film was when Tug Speedman, played by Ben Stiller, he ventures off away from the rest of his group and into the deep jungle. And one night he's forced to make himself a little fort, and as a result, he encounters a panda. And funnily enough, he had sponsored a preservation for pandas, and he soon realizes what he's done, and he just accepts it. He just says, "Okay, I guess I'll wear the skin of the panda." And another thing what I love about this one is the trailers at the start. The fake trailers are so funny. It's so funny because they're true. It's true. They make these ludicrous movies on Hollywood sometimes, and I like how they rat on Hollywood, and particularly Tom Cruise's cameo as Les Grossman is iconic. And it's such a memorable film in that you don't have to be committed to this one role. You can venture out and into other genres and other ways of life to be successful. And I think that's what this movie tries to do. And that I think that always isn't the main star. That the supporting cast is just as important, if not more important, than the main star. And I think that's what this movie tries to tell, and I think it does an excellent job with that. Next, we have Nightcrawler, not to be confused with the X-Men's superhero. This movie follows the story of a character named Lou and his venture into the life of a photographer, most notably being one who tracks down the late-night crime. And we're introduced to him where he's at a construction site, somewhere he's not supposed to be, and he's confronted by this man who tells him that he's not welcome there. and we don't see it, but we can assume that he ended up either killing this security guard, and we're soon introduced to the fact that he is inspired to become a late night photographer, and it's conflicting because we know that is not a good guy at all, but he's trying to make out a living, and it almost makes him an anti-hero in that, and that he's doing a pretty despicable occupation and taking pictures of people who are near death or just have experienced extreme hardship. But he has no sympathy whatsoever to that, and he just is determined to make a living. And then when he soon makes it big, he hires an assistant to help him out and get him to the crime scenes faster. In a guy named Rick, played by Riz Ahmed, who just so happened to be nominated for an Academy Award this year. And in particular, one scene that stands out to me is very eerie is when they do arrive on the side of a crime scene minutes before that of the police. They almost witness the crime occurring as it happens, and they don't decide to help. They just are there to witness and take pictures, and it's so creepy how invested they are in their job and how the lack of humanity they have in their job, and that they're just willing to exploit human life for the news. And just makes you think about what the news has become, because as Rene Russo's character says in the movie,
to capture the spirit of what we air is think of our newscast as a screaming woman running down the street with her throat cut.
I think that's an extremely fair sentiment as to what the news has become. It's almost become a circus of sorts, and they really thrive on these extreme cases of crime for viewership. It's the only way they can really survive now. In particular, there's another two scenes that stand out as showcasing Lou's, that showcase him as a sociopath, is when he ends up taking pictures of his former mentor in Bill Paxton's character, and oblivious to the fact that it doesn't matter that he who he was. He had a falling out with Lou, and as a result, he wasn't willing to look at him as a human. Same thing with his assistant too, Rick, when he was near death after being shot at the end, as they were desperate to get in on the action of this major criminal on the run. He leaves him for dead. He explains to him that this shot is more important than your life, basically. And it's so tragic, and I can't even imagine anyone behaving like that. But I think Jake Gyllenhaal, this is probably the best acting role of his life, and it still boggles me to this day that he was never nominated for Best Actor. But overall, it's such a creepy movie that I would be hard pressed to watch again. But in my one time watching it, it definitely captivated me for the 2 hours it was. Next up is Baby Driver, the most recent film directed by Edgar Wright. This movie is one of the most thrilling and non-stop movies that I've ever seen. And I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but we're introduced to this driver who's nicknamed Baby, and he's a getaway driver for this group of criminals who are just so happen to be performing a heist. And what makes him so good at his job is how invested he is with his music, and almost so that he can't drive without his music, and it makes him who he is. As we later learn that he had been in an accident when he was younger that left him, as was said in the film, with a
on the drum plays music to drown it out.
And just the whole music in this movie goes intertwined. Like this movie cannot function without the music, because of the fact that it's almost goes hand in hand with the speed of this movie. And I think that while we know that what Baby is doing is immoral and illegal, we root for him because of the fact that he's almost he's innocent and unassuming in how he acts, and while being threatened by the likes of Jamie Foxx's character and John Berthal, and how can we forget the fact that he soon develops a romantic relationship with Deborah, and he's so determined to get out. He's so determined to get out of this life, and he is willing to do whatever means necessary to do so. But he's basically stuck in this relationship with Doc, played by Kevin Spacey, and there's no, and if he leaves, he could get killed, and so he knows the stakes to being in this life of crime, and how there's no way of getting out of it. But at the same time, he's so infatuated with Deborah that he wants to get out of it. And particularly the scenes when he is at the diner and has to has to be served by Deborah, with her not knowing of what his occupation of work is really tense, and it's awkward for him because of the fact that he's kind of embarrassed by the life he lives, when it should be the other way around, but it totally isn't. And the action in this movie is just unbelievable. The scene where they're performing the heist, and John Hamm's character Buddy ends up chasing after Baby for failing to help him in this heist, of which ended up costing his fiancee, Darling. And and he was an unlikely villain for this movie. I did not see that coming. And overall, it's such a great movie, and it looks, the cinematography is excellent. I really like the colors of this movie, and how they're able to turn Atlanta into such a, a fast and quirky city is really cool to see. The main criticism I would have for this movie would be the fact that, well, Kevin Spacey being in it, he does a good job, but obviously he's synonymous for where he is right now. And also the treatment of women in this movie is kind of misogynistic, and kind of like Mary Sue, in that particularly you have Deborah being in danger and being threatened to being put in danger, and she doesn't really develop a character arc or really get to showcase her strength. Obviously, you see at the end of the movie that Baby does end up getting arrested, but we envision that he will eventually be determined innocent for his real lack of culpability in the crimes. But overall, this is a very good movie that I think will age well in subsequent years. Number 12 is Knives Out, a movie directed by Rian Johnson. I've never seen a movie of his before, but he put in an excellent job with this movie. And particularly the premise being that an old man who's a retired author is suddenly murdered, and they have to discover what happened and who could have killed him. And so we see the interrogation of several members of this family, of which all of them are quirky characters in their own right, and we see what kind of motives they have that potentially could justify why they would have murdered their family member in Christopher Plummer. And all of them range from different ages and to different motives and different personalities. And it is all the interrogation scenes are so unique in how each character has something different to say. They each have their own grudge or perception of the patriarch of the family in Christopher Plummer. And particularly what stands out is the performance of Benoit Blanc, and Daniel Craig plays him to an excellent extent. I mean, you really are rooting for him to uncover what is behind the murder of Harlan Thrombey. And I think there's a bunch of subtle messages that point to who wound up killing him, and particularly when we're introduced to his grandson, Ransom, played by Chris Evans, we can sense that there's something up with him and how he kind of reacts apathetic to the murder of his grandfather, and that's suspicious for for Benoit and his right hand man, right hand man, Detective Elliot. So they go out on this wild goose chase to implore more into Ransom's past, and they soon discover that Ransom had a falling out with his grandfather, and on the night of his death, had asked him for more money, which he refused. And as a result, he took out his frustration, and eventually, what we uncovered is that he killed his grandfather in revenge, almost having a cynical view of his family. And this is pointed out ironically by their servant, Marta. And it's a astounding revelation, to say the least. Obviously, it wasn't trying to be subtle with who committed the crime, but they they certainly went down a road that made it look like that, and I applaud them for that. But overall, it's such a unique film that that has been done before, such as in Clue. But these kind of movies, the mystery movies, are such a unique genre that in itself that they're definitely refreshing, and I think that this movie was definitely one of that, and I like to see more of these kind of movies, and I would be thrilled if they made a sequel, assuming that it would be go away from the certain family in particular and delve into the lives of another family. That'd be very fascinating because Benoit Blanc proved that he was capable of. He stole the show in this movie. And last but not least for today is Hot Fuzz, another movie directed by Edgar Wright. And this movie has some similar themes to Knives Out, with there being kind of a specific tone that the movie's going for, and how we are introduced to this main police officer, Nicholas Angel, played by Simon Pegg, who's portrayed as someone who can't do no wrong, and he's just almost this perfect police officer. He tracks down every inmate he's looking for, and he does an excellent job. And while being patrol in London, he's suddenly moved to the small English town in Sanford, and is instructed to take on a significant role there as their sergeant. And he soon has to work alongside this other police officer and Constable Danny Butterman, and they soon develop a friendship. But this town is not what it seems, as there's something eerie about the townspeople, and particularly we're left suspicious of the manager of the supermarket, played by Timothy Dalton, and how he's been acting kind of strange around the town. And we see that there is a house that burned down, and also that just so happens to coincide with the death of two actors of of the Romeo and Juliet play that they went to. And so they start finding it suspicious that all this is happening. As well, another incident occurs where a wealthy landowner goes missing, and so it adds to the suspicion. And Angel concludes that this has to be connected to some property deal that just so happened that happened not too long ago. And when he goes to confront the pastor, the church's steeple falls on him and crushes him to death, and which was an incredibly shocking scene. And they go on to investigate more into what is occurring in this town, and eventually we get the revelation that the whole mastermind behind this town is the police inspector and Danny's father, Inspector Frank Butterman, who's concocted this plan to rid the town of all the powered people, implementing a almost cult-like view into the town. And so Angel and Butterman have to fight off all the people who have gone insane. And what I really like about this movie, it takes inspiration from the likes of Point Break and And like with Baby Driver, Edgar Wright really knows how to utilize music to his advantage in this movie. And this movie was really the start of that. And I applaud him for that because it really helps in setting the tone for this movie. And eventually, when they do defeat the Inspector Butterman, it it's such a relief because the fact that everyone in the town was against them to start and really had no trust in the police as a major authority. But Angel, using his experience that he learned from his time in London, is able to put together a team with alongside himself and Danny to defeat the illness that has corrupted this town. And eventually, Angel himself gets promoted to inspector, with Danny being sergeant, and it's so satisfying that I think that Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, they can do no wrong. And as I will and look to in the last video with another one of their movies, they are one of the best comedic duos of all time, and this movie is an excellent example of that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video of movies 20 to 11. Join me next time as I finish my ranking of all the movies I watched in 2020. Arrivederci.